Matt, our audience here at the Yale Youth Ministry Institute often includes people in nonprofit work, and we also have church workers in our midst, so secular nonprofit and church, and you have a foot in both of those camps. Can you speak to the challenges about each one of those roles and perhaps the gift of being connected to both settings?
Yeah, so I like to think about innovation a lot, and I would say I'm actually connected in three worlds. Um, I would say I'm in the nonprofit world, the church world, and then I guess I would say I'm not. I don't have a for-profit company, but I'm in the marketplace to the extent that like margins matter and net revenues matter. So it's a weird blend because I would not be a traditional nonprofit in a lot of ways. So what's interesting about that is like if you go and read anything on innovation, like one of the keys to innovating is the idea of cross-pollinating things. And it's the ability to bring things that either seem unrelated or divergent together in kind of a slightly new combination. And that's what social enterprise does. It brings business plus nonprofit together with like governmental aid work and the church. Like if we're talking about like redemptive enterprise, as some people call it, or missional enterprise in the church. So what's cool is being involved in each one of those allows me to critique and reflect critically on each sphere, right? So I can ask compassionate questions because of the gospel about the marketplace. I can also appreciate parts of the marketplace that call into question parts of the nonprofit model. Like a friend of mine who was a minister, who's a venture capitalist now in Colorado said, "Have you ever met a nonprofit that actually solved the problem it was working on?"
Ah,
And that stopped me dead in my tracks. And where he's in food scarcity kind of issues and trying to create a company that's sustainable and make profit and completely disrupt the food waste industry. It's incredible. But it's a great question. These different worlds always ask questions. And that's a personal philosophy. That's a natural bent of mine is I always want people in the room who disagree with me and who are going to ask me hard questions because they reveal the weaknesses of my own viewpoints, the weaknesses of the models I want to build, and then can augment them when they're in the room. And I would say, like, that's a big part of the gospel too. Like as God comes into the world in Christ, Jesus asks questions, and he also seems to float between these different spheres. I've never articulated this before, but one of my favorite books is by I think he's a Dane named Gerd Thiessen, called The Shadow of the Galilean, right? And it's a neat, and I'm a history major. So like, it's this neat look at like Jesus from these different angles of his contemporary world. And he never quite fully inhabits one bucket, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes out in the wilderness. The Romans, right? He floats between all of these worlds and therefore is able to question each one of them and bring them together in these odd ways that just stay just beyond the grasp, which is what God does, of our ability to contain it. So I think that's a key part of all of this is the church brings this wonderful set of dynamics within its theology and practically to nonprofit and for-profit work. And likewise, I've had to reframe some of my preaching, teaching, and even thinking about what the church should be simply from being immersed in the marketplace and the nonprofit world. Like I think there's so it's just the cross-pollination. There's a ton of waste in the nonprofit world. There's a ton of lack of ingenuity and problem solving and drive in the church world. And there's a lack of compassion at places in the for-profit world. And yet I sometimes think the for-profit world, I appreciate its directness, its efficiency, its unwillingness to play nice all the time, which the church does to an enabling fault. So it's the interacting, it's like the Trinity, man. It's just like interacting on itself in this crazy way that brings life. So it's the interplay that is where the meaning is.
yeah.